Manchester stands as one of England's most storied urban centres, boasting a heritage that stretches from ancient earthworks and Roman fortifications to the cutting-edge developments of the present day. Renowned for its pivotal role in the Industrial Revolution, this modern metropolis has a history woven from threads of innovation, social reform, cultural vibrancy, and economic transformation. Long before the name Manchester appeared in written records, the area was home to prehistoric communities that fished the rivers and hunted across the lowland forests. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neolithic and Bronze Age peoples roamed the region. Flint tools, burial mounds, and other artifacts reveal a sparse but continuous presence. By the Iron Age, scattered tribal groups such as the Brigantes, dominant in much of northern England, established small hill forts and farming settlements in the area. The convergence of rivers, notably the Irwell, Medlock, and Irk, offered strategic advantages for settlement. Fertile floodplains and easily accessible water made for decent farmland. Forests provided raw materials like timber and game. While limited archaeological finds exist, it's likely that the groups here participated in trade networks spreading across Britain. Salt, metals, and possibly textiles were exchanged among local clans, foreshadowing the mercantile prowess that Manchester would demonstrate millennia later. The Romans arrived in Britain in the 1st century CE, advancing northward to secure their empire's new frontier. By around 79 CE, they established a fort named Mamucium, or Mancunium, on a rocky bluff near the confluence of the Medlock and Irwell rivers. Purpose of the fort: Mamucium helped guard the route between the legionary fortress at Chester, Diva Victrix, and key Roman outposts like York, Iberacum. Garrisoned by auxiliary troops, the fort featured ditches, ramparts, and wooden palisades, later upgraded to stone. Emergence of civilian settlement. Around the fort, a vicus civilian settlement developed, inhabited by traders, artisans, and the families of soldiers. Archaeologists have uncovered pottery, coins, and personal items revealing a mix of local Britons and immigrants from elsewhere in the empire. Etymology: the name Mamucium likely derived from a Celtic or Brythonic word meaning breast-shaped hill, reflecting the terrain. Over centuries, the name evolved into forms such as Mamacester, before becoming Manchester. When Roman influence waned in the 4th and early 5th centuries, Mamucium was gradually abandoned. Yet the imprint of the Roman foundation influenced subsequent settlement patterns, sowing the seeds of the future city. With the Roman legion's departure in the early 5th century, Britain fragmented into small kingdoms. The site of Manchester lay on the border of Celtic-speaking and Anglo-Saxon realms, a frontier setting that shaped its evolution. Anglo-Saxon settlements. By the 7th century, the Kingdom of Northumbria expanded into much of northern England, including the Manchester region. The old Roman fort likely lay in ruins, but Saxon farmers and local lords established homesteads nearby. Christianization. Missionaries from Lindisfarne and other ecclesiastical centers spread Christianity. Early church sites in the region possibly date to the 8th century, though historical documentation is scant. Norse and Danish raids. Beginning in the late 8th century, Vikings from Denmark or the wider Norse world periodically raided along the coasts and inland rivers. While Manchester lay somewhat inland, raiding parties ventured up rivers like the Ribble or Mersey. Some Norse settlers integrated with local communities, contributing to place name elements and farming techniques. Following the Norman conquest of 1066, William Thirst sought to consolidate power in northern England. This period saw the harrying of the north, wherein rebellious areas faced brutal suppression. Although Manchester itself wasn't a major battleground, it certainly felt the aftershocks. Manorial system. Under Norman rule, land was parceled out to lords loyal to the crown. A local lord, often tied to the Grelle family, controlled Manchester's manor. Records from the Domesday Book of 1086 refer to the area, but actual mentions of Manchester remain limited, indicating a small settlement. Manchester's first lordly residence. By the late 12th century, the de Grelle family constructed a modest motte and bailey fortification in the area. Over time, it evolved into a manor house or castle, likely the precursor to sites near modern-day Chatham School of Music. Establishment of a church. Ecclesiastical presence grew stronger. A church, the forerunner to Manchester Cathedral, existed by the 13th century, forming a religious nucleus for the growing township. With the creation of chapels and markets, Manchester's medieval identity took shape, bridging rural estates and an evolving urban center. During the 13th and 14th centuries, numerous English towns obtained market charters, fueling trade and local prosperity. Manchester joined this trend. In 1301, Thomas de Grelly secured a market charter, formalizing Manchester's status as a market town. Weekly markets and annual fairs drew merchants from surrounding villages, fostering commerce in wool, foodstuffs, and basic crafts. A small but influential group of burgesses, town freemen, and merchants began to shape local affairs. Trade in woolen cloth, in particular, grew, hinting at Manchester's future as a textile powerhouse. The Black Death of 1348–49 likely devastated the population, as it did across Europe. Additionally, the 15th century Wars of the Roses touched parts of Lancashire. Still, Manchester endured, thanks to its markets and the protective power of local feudal lords. While not yet the industrial juggernaut it would become, late medieval Manchester demonstrated an early inclination toward textile work. Farming households supplemented incomes by spinning wool or weaving cloth at home. Carts carrying raw wool from sheep farming districts arrived regularly, fueling this cottage industry. Streams like the Irk and Medlock provided energy for fulling mills, which cleaned and thickened cloth. Though modest in output, these mills prefigured the mechanized revolution to come. Local authorities and guilds regulated cloth quality and prices, as was common in medieval trade. This structured approach balanced innovation with tradition, ensuring Manchester's emerging reputation for textiles. By the dawn of the early modern period, Manchester was a modest but steadily growing settlement, with roots firmly planted in commerce, minor textile production, and an increasingly dynamic market culture. The Reformation, propelled by King Henry VIII's break from the Catholic Church in the 1530s, brought significant change across England, including Manchester. Dissolution of monasteries, monastic orders lost their lands, and church holdings often transferred to new lay owners. In Manchester, ecclesiastical reorganizations affected funding for local charities and educational foundations, such as the parish church that would later become Manchester Cathedral. Collegiate Church. In 1421, the church in Manchester had been elevated to a collegiate foundation. Though the Reformation disrupted some of its operations, the institution survived, eventually blossoming into a major religious anchor for the region. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, cotton, a fabric introduced through Mediterranean and colonial trade, began to supplement wool. Domestic cotton processing. Merchants imported raw cotton from places like the Levant via London, or later, from the Americas. Families in the Manchester hinterland spun the cotton into yarn or wove it with linen to produce fustian, a sturdy cloth. This mixing laid the foundation for the region's future cotton dominance. Civil War impact. The English Civil War 1642–1651 did not bypass Manchester. In 1642, the town withstood a brief siege by Royalist forces because many locals aligned with Parliament. After the war, the forging of new commercial relationships continued, slightly hindered by national instability, yet overall trending toward growth. The later 17th century saw Manchester's population expand, fueling demand for expanded marketplaces, improved roads, and enhanced local governance. Fustian trade. Fustian, a blend of cotton and linen or wool, became a Manchester specialty by the 18th century. Merchants thrived on distributing these textiles throughout Britain, while some ventured into continental markets. Dissenting traditions. Nonconformist religious groups such as Presbyterians, Quakers, and later Methodists found relative freedom in Manchester, contributing to a spirit of religious and intellectual pluralism. These dissenters often included prosperous industrialists and merchants, forging philanthropic and educational institutions. By 1700, Manchester was no sleepy parish. Increasingly recognized as a commercial locus, it was poised to become the crucible for a full-scale industrial transformation. The Industrial Revolution, which historians typically place between the mid-1700s and mid-1800s, found its epicenter in Manchester, often dubbed Cottonopolis. A confluence of factors triggered unprecedented growth. Technological breakthroughs, inventions like the spinning jenny, James Hargreaves, the water frame, Richard Arkwright, and later the mule, Samuel Crompton from nearby Bolton, revolutionized spinning. Looms, steam engines, and other machinery drastically cut labor time while boosting output. Steam power. James Watt's improvements to the steam engine enabled factory owners to locate mills in urban areas rather than depending solely on water streams. Manchester's mills multiplied, their chimneys soon defining the skyline. Entrepreneurial spirit. The presence of wealthy families and networks of investors, some drawn by religious dissenting circles' emphasis on commerce, provided crucial capital. The local willingness to adopt new technologies in search of profit distinguished Manchester from more conservative regions. To support the booming textile industry, Manchester required enhanced transportation. Bridgewater Canal, opened 1761. Funded by the Duke of Bridgewater and engineered by James Brindley, the Bridgewater Canal was a marvel. It cut the cost of coal transport from nearby Worsley mines dramatically, fueling steam engines and household hearths. Rochdale Canal and beyond, subsequent canals integrated Manchester into a broader waterway network connecting to Liverpool and Leeds. Raw cotton arrived from the port of Liverpool, while finished cloth could be shipped out to domestic and international markets. Revolutionary impact. Cheaper transport lowered overhead costs, allowing entrepreneurs to reinvest in machinery and expand factories. By the early 19th century, Manchester had become the heart of a dynamic web of canals, overshadowing many older market towns in economic significance. The city's population soared, from around 22,000 in 1773 to roughly 180,000 by 1831, leading to urgent social and infrastructural issues. Housing and public health, hastily constructed back-to-back terraces, courtyards, and cellar dwellings proliferated. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, and polluted water supplies contributed to frequent outbreaks of cholera and other diseases. Labor force. Tens of thousands of rural migrants, both local English and Irish, poured into Manchester seeking factory work. Child labor was common, wages were low, and working conditions harsh. Protest and reform. Dire living conditions spurred labor unrest and radical politics. The Peterloo Massacre of 1819, when cavalry charged a crowd demanding parliamentary reform at St. Peter's Field, left deep scars in local memory and sparked nationwide calls for social change. Manchester's industrial might thus arrived at a heavy social cost, forging a city of both unprecedented productivity and acute human strife. By the mid-19th century, Manchester was recognized internationally as the prototype industrial metropolis, hailed as the workshop of the world. An upsurge in civic pride led to the construction of grand municipal architecture. The Manchester Town Hall, a Gothic Revival masterpiece designed by Alfred Waterhouse, opened in 1877. Ornate public libraries, museums, and philanthropic institutions sprang up, reflecting the city's wealth. The city fostered a lively intellectual scene, with societies dedicated to literature, the arts, and science. The Manchester Literary and Philosophical Society, founded in 1781, counted leading scientists among its members. The society hosted lectures that advanced knowledge in chemistry, physics, and biology. Cotton production peaked during the Victorian period. American Civil War crisis. The cotton famine, 1861 to 1865, disrupted supplies of raw cotton from the southern United States, causing significant unemployment and hardship in Manchester. Nonetheless, local importers sought alternative sources, such as Egypt and India, to keep mills running. Warehouses and trading. The city's distinctive Victorian warehouses, often lavishly adorned, stored vast quantities of raw cotton and finished cloth. Manchester's Royal Exchange became a global center for cotton trading, where fortunes were made and sometimes lost in daily deals. Railway innovations. The Liverpool and Manchester Railway, opened 1830, was one of the world's earliest intercity passenger lines, revolutionizing transport further. Other connections soon followed, weaving Manchester into a national railway network that facilitated rapid dispatch of goods. Though industrial wealth flourished, Victorian Manchester also saw the rise of philanthropic efforts and grassroots activism. Charitable housing. Reformers like John Howard, along with Christian and nonconformist philanthropists, championed better housing, education, and health care for the poor. Civic leaders established hospitals, schools, and model dwellings. Cooperative movement. Nearby Rochdale was the birthplace of the modern cooperative movement in the 1840s, influencing Manchester's own co-ops. Many industrial workers embraced mutual aid societies, seeking fair prices for daily essentials. Trade unions and suffrage. Manchester's working classes bolstered the city's position as a hotbed of trade union activity. Figures like Emmeline Pankhurst, born in nearby Moss Side, would lead the fight for women's suffrage. Votes for women protests found strong local support, echoing the city's radical heritage from the Peterloo era. By the close of Queen Victoria's reign in 1901, Manchester had grown into a sprawling urban colossus of over 500,000 residents, forging an identity built on cotton, commerce, and a fervent belief in social progress. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 jolted Manchester's industrial rhythms. War production, factories repurposed to produce munitions, textiles for uniforms, and other war-related supplies. Thousands of Mancunians enlisted, many perished in battles like the Somme. Economic shifts, post-war, global competition in textiles intensified. Emerging producers in places like Japan and India challenged Manchester's dominance. Intermittent recessions hurt local mills, forcing some to close or consolidate. Housing upgrades. Influenced by the Homes for Heroes campaign and post-war reforms, Manchester City Council began clearing slums and erecting suburban estates, such as Wythenshawe. Improved living conditions and expansions in public transport gradually reshaped the city's landscape. Despite economic woes, Manchester's cultural scene matured. Music halls and theaters thrived, while orchestras and philanthropic patrons championed classical music. The Halle Orchestra, founded in 1858, continued drawing international acclaim into the 20th century, playing at the newly built Free Trade Hall. Literature and journalism. The Manchester Guardian, later The Guardian, rose as an influential liberal newspaper under the editorship of C.P. Scott. Writers with local ties, such as Howard Spring and Lewis Golding, depicted the everyday struggles of northern life. Sports and recreation. Football clubs like Manchester United, originally Newton Heath LYRFC, and Manchester City, founded as St. Mark's in West Gorton, garnered loyal fan bases. Over time, these teams would become global sporting powerhouses. World War II again tested Manchester's mettle. The Blitz, German Luftwaffe raids targeted industrial centers, with bombs hitting Manchester in late 1940. Residential districts and key factories suffered damage, though the city's core industries remained operational enough to contribute to Britain's war effort. Post-war reconstruction. Britain's 1945 victory opened a period of reconstruction. Manchester capitalized on new government programs for urban renewal, though the loss of empire and shifting global markets forced the city to reconsider its industrial base. Cotton's supremacy was declining, replaced by engineering, chemicals, and emerging technologies. From the 1950s through the 1970s, deindustrialization battered Manchester. Mill closures, textile mills once humming with activity, fell silent as manufacturing jobs went abroad or to more modern UK plants. Entire neighborhoods faced unemployment and economic hardship. Slum clearances. Large-scale demolition of Victorian terraces continued. High-rise council flats sprang up, sometimes with inadequate amenities, creating social problems and discontent among residents. Cultural upheaval. The decline in manufacturing coincided with social and musical revolutions. In the 1960s, the Mersey beat from nearby Liverpool overshadowed Manchester's pop scene, though local groups like the Hollies found success. The seeds of a distinctly Mancunian music identity were, however, planted, soon to bloom in new forms. Against the backdrop of economic woes, Manchester forged fresh cultural expressions. Punk and post-punk, bands such as the Buzzcocks, Joy Division, and later New Order injected new life into the city. Their unique sounds reverberated worldwide, forging Manchester's identity as a music capital. Factory Records. Founded by Tony Wilson and Alan Erasmus, Factory Records nurtured iconic acts. Their label merged music, art, and radical design, producing the Hacienda nightclub, an emblem of Manchester's avant-garde nightlife that would shape the emerging acid house and rave scenes of the 1980s and 1990s. Urban challenges. At the same time, racial tensions, especially in areas like Moss Side, flared. Police-community relations suffered, culminating in riots. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's deindustrialization policies left swathes of the North in economic limbo. Despite adversity, local solidarity movements, trade unions, and youth subcultures brought a rebellious, can-do spirit. The 1990s marked a turning point in Manchester's fortunes. IRA bombing, 1996. A massive terrorist bomb near the Arndale shopping center caused extensive damage, but miraculously no fatalities. The subsequent rebuilding triggered one of Europe's largest urban regeneration projects, modernizing the city center with contemporary architecture and improved public spaces. Urban chic, disused warehouses in areas like Castlefield, the Northern Quarter, and Ancoats were converted into chic apartments, offices, and arts venues. This rebirth tapped into a growing population of young professionals attracted to city center living and vibrant nightlife. Sport and international events. Manchester hosted the 2002 Commonwealth Games, ushering in new facilities such as the City of Manchester Stadium, later Etihad Stadium, upgrading transport infrastructure, and spotlighting the city on the global stage. No longer defined by cotton spinning, Manchester embraced a knowledge economy, media and technology. The BBC and other media organizations relocated or expanded operations to Media City UK and Salford Quays, boosting digital and creative industries. Tech startups flourished, making Manchester a northern hub of innovation. Universities and research. The University of Manchester, Manchester Metropolitan University, and other institutions consolidated, attracting international students and research funds. Discoveries like graphene by professors Andrei Geim and Konstantin Novoselov amplified Manchester's scientific reputation. Music and arts renaissance. Building on the legacy of factory records, the city produced Britpop phenomenon Oasis in the 1990s, plus a range of indie and electronic acts. Venues like the Manchester Arena, Bridgewater Hall, and smaller clubs continued to host global headliners. Art galleries, including the Whitworth and Manchester Art Gallery, staged major exhibitions, further elevating the city's cultural cachet. Entering the 21st century, Manchester has solidified its standing as a metropolitan hub. Demographic shifts. The city's population once again grows, spurred by immigration, particularly from Asia, the Caribbean, and Africa, EU arrivals, and movement from other UK regions. This enriches Manchester's multicultural tapestry, reflected in thriving neighborhoods like Rusholme, famed for its Curry Mile, and Cheetham Hill. Transport and connectivity. The expanding Metrolink tram system, ongoing rail improvements, and the presence of Manchester Airport, one of the UK's busiest, position the city as a logistical gateway to the north. High-speed rail proposals, HS2, promise even more connectivity, though with controversies about cost and environmental impacts. Sports and events. Football remains an international attraction. Manchester United and Manchester City rank among the world's richest clubs. Meanwhile, mega events like the UEFA Euro tournaments or National Track Cycling Championships at the Velodrome highlight the city's broad sporting appeal. Like most major urban centers, Manchester grapples with issues of inequality, housing affordability, and environmental sustainability. Regeneration gaps. While central districts boast gleaming towers and upscale developments, some outlying wards suffer from persistent poverty. Civic leaders debate strategies to ensure equitable growth, bridging wealth disparities across the region. Green initiatives. Movements toward a zero-carbon future see Manchester investing in green spaces, improved cycle routes, and renewable energy projects. The city's leadership aspires to align with broader targets for climate responsibility. Cultural confidence. Manny's sense of identity, forthright, independent, proud, guides ongoing expansions in the arts. Manchester International Festival, established in 2007, showcases avant-garde performances, attracting global attention and reinforcing the city's reputation for fostering new ideas. To trace Manchester's history is to follow the arc of British, and in many ways, global, industrial, cultural, and political evolution. From a Roman fort to a medieval market hamlet, then rocketing into an industrial colossus, and eventually morphing into a modern city championing science, media, and sports, Manchester embodies ceaseless transformation, ingenuity, and innovation. At each stage, the city's greatest leaps stem from the synergy between inventive minds and practical frameworks, whether in steam-powered cotton spinning or cutting-edge materials science. Resilience and resistance. Periods of hardship, from 19th century worker exploitation to late 20th century economic collapse, spurred reform and radical thought. Peterloo, the suffragette movement, and the city's musical rebellions each reflect a tradition of standing up to entrenched power. Global legacy. As the cradle of the Industrial Revolution, Manchester's historical impact on global manufacturing, urban planning, social theory, and culture cannot be overstated. Its experiences prefigured modern city life, with all the attendant challenges and triumphs. In the present, Manchester balances its storied past with a vibrant, forward-facing vision. Ancient ruins and industrial heritage sites stand alongside glass-walled skyscrapers. Canals once clogged with coal barges are reimagined as leisure waterways, lined with trendy lofts, creative studios, and bustling eateries. Where cotton mills once thundered, technology firms and research labs now hum with digital energy. Such contrasts capture the essence of modern Manchester, a place unafraid to reinvent itself, bold in the face of adversity, and steadfast in championing cultural expression and progressive ideals. The city's centuries-long journey from Mamucium to Manchester and beyond proves that its capacity for innovation is inexhaustible. If history is any guide, Manchester will remain at the forefront of change, forging a path that continues to inspire not just the north of England, but the entire world. Sources and suggested reading: Aston, T. and Philpin, CHE. The Brenner Debate: Agrarian Class Structure and Economic Development in Pre-Industrial Europe. Cambridge University Press. Kidd, A. and Roberts, S. City, Class, and Culture: Studies of Social Policy and Cultural Production in Victorian Manchester. Manchester University Press. Porter, D. The Making of the Central Pennines: Historical Geography and Settlement Patterns. Local Histories Press. Mosley, A. Manchester: A History. Carnegie Publishing. Williams, G. The Nature of the Industrial Revolution. British Academic Press.